Scottish Socialist Party's case for independence. We've been travelling around the country talking about how beautiful an independent Scotland can be, and just want to share it with people. I'm very lucky tonight. You've got two great speakers. You've got Colin, I'm his apprentice, and Colin's a co-spokesperson of the Scottish Socialist Party along with me. And as you know, he's been involved in politics since the poll tax days, fighting against poverty, and a great speaker. And John McAllion, I can remember when John had black hair actually. Do you remember when I grew up here? You remember? And John has always been great at campaigning, for people on the left wing of the party. He left the Labour Party as a member of the Scottish Socialist Party. So tonight we're going to be having a discussion. Colin and John are going to be talking about our case for independence and how beautiful it can be, because it's going to be beautiful. We'll have to share it with people. And then there'll be a chance for everyone to contribute and get some questions from the floor. So can we start first of all by introducing Colin as our first speaker. Thank you.
This is Sandra Webster. Sandra is the other national spokesman of the Scottish Socialist Party. Amongst the things you forgot to do there was tell you her name. So this is Sandra Webster, and as I understand it, we're expecting a performance poet, right? So those of you who are expecting a performance poet should rest assured it's no me. When he comes at 7:30, he'll be standing here and look forward to some poetry then. Maybe thinks it's 7:30. So, like Sandra, I want to thank you all for coming. It's terrific that you came. It's the end of November, isn't it? It's bitterly cold. And it's good that you came to the meeting, because without you, of course, it would mean nothing. Tonight's meeting, as Sandra said, is part of a whole series of SSP public meetings across the country that John McAllion, Sandra, myself, Campbell Martin and other speakers have addressed in the last few weeks. And it's part of our attempt to take to the widest possible audience the Scottish Socialist Party's message was that we're in favour of an independent socialist Scotland. And it's our job tonight to explain what that means. But last night there was a meeting in Robertson in Ayrshire. Last Monday night, and John McAllion's done most of these, so this will ring through to him. He was in Pollokshields in Glasgow. We've had meetings in Irvine, we've had meetings in Edinburgh, we've had meetings in Paisley, we've had meetings in Cathcart, we've had meetings in East Kilbride, Leith. We were at the SNP conference in Perth a couple of weeks ago, which was the Scottish Socialist Party's first ever fringe meeting at the SNP conference. We've had a fringe meeting at the Independence March, which took place in Edinburgh in September. I think a few people were probably there. We had a fringe meeting at the STUC demonstration in Glasgow in October against the austerity and the cuts. And the Scottish Socialist Party has, I can tell you, since the SNP conference, more than 75 people have applied to join the SSP as a consequence of the issues that we'll come and discuss tonight. Yesterday I was in Glasgow in the Radisson Blue Hotel, where the Radical Independence Conference took place on Saturday. And yesterday the Scottish Socialist Party was having discussions with a man called Adil Bhatti. And Adil used to be a member of the SNP. He left the SNP over the change of policy in NATO. And Adil was the chairman of Asians for Independence in Scotland. And he's discussing ways about the possibility of him joining the SSP, and of course, like you and others, they'd be very welcome. So that's to give you a flavour of the context of tonight's meeting. And of course, the purpose of tonight's meeting isn't just about explaining to you what the Scottish Socialist Party's programme and vision of independence looks like. It's to hear your vision, it's to swap ideas, it's to learn from one another. But it's also about establishing a branch of the Scottish Socialist Party here in Dundee. And my job as the national spokesman of the party is to convey information to you that perhaps you won't have heard elsewhere. You won't have heard it now that the courier is away. You probably won't hear it in the courier either. But the Scottish Socialist Party, I think you can understand, we are the standard bearers of independence in Scotland for the left. I sit on the Yes Scotland Advisory Board, which in itself is a reflection. We were invited, I was invited to sit on the advisory board and represent the Scottish Socialist Party in recognition of the fact that for 13 years now, the Scottish Socialist Party has been a passionate supporter of independence for Scotland, because essentially our view is that working class people in this city, and every city and village and town across Scotland, will be better off under independence. Will be economically better off, will be socially better off, will be culturally better off, and we'll be politically better off. And that's good enough for us, because this is a class question. This is about advancing the interests of working class people in Scotland. And the Scottish Socialist Party helped to establish the Scottish Independence Convention way back in 2005. In fact, it was November the 30th, 2005. So Friday is the 7th anniversary of that meeting that took place. The lunch meeting took place in the Dynamic Earth in Edinburgh, and there was 400 or 500 people there, as I recall it. I spoke, Alex Salmon spoke, Robin Harper spoke for the Greens, Elaine C. Smith spoke, there was various other figures from artistic, academic and cultural Scotland. And I remember saying on that night, and I say it again tonight, that of course myself, John McAllion, yourselves, we aren't the first socialists to support independence. In 1923, perhaps Scotland's greatest advocate of an independent socialist Scotland, John McLean, died in St Andrew's Day in 1923. And I remember saying that to the Dynamic Earth meeting, that yes, it's St Andrew's Day, but for us there's a more important figure associated with radical, progressive advance in politics in Scotland, and it was the great Red Clydeside leader John McLean. So this Friday, maybe you'll spare a thought, raise a glass in memory of John McLean and the contribution he played to the struggle that we're part of. So the SSP, along with the SNP and the Greens, helped to establish the Scottish Independence Convention 7 years ago. And I would put it to you that the Scottish Independence Convention is in effect the mother of the Yes Scotland campaign. That was where the work was done, that's where that child was nourished, that's where that idea came from. That a referendum would put forward and that Scotland would decide its own future. We would have a decision to make about determining its own future, and we'd have the opportunity to make our own decisions and plan out our own future in the future. And as I said, the Scottish Socialist Party's view is that working people will be better off economically, socially, as I said. But let's be clear about it. It's on one proviso. Working people will only be better off if we stand up for ourselves and we organise ourselves, because we won't be better off automatically under independence left to those that aren't socialists and don't have the interests of working class people behind them. And I have to say to you, I campaign across the country, like I suppose many of the comrades in here do, and across the country people say to me, Colin, why do you support independence? And I say to them, I support independence because you'll be better off. You and I will be better off. If all the wealth and taxes and profits and duties and levies that are raised here in Scotland stay here in Scotland instead of being siphoned off to the Westminster Treasury or to boardrooms across the world, then it stands to reason we'll have more money to share out and to address those fundamental, disgraceful social inadequacies and social inequalities that Scotland has today. And in a meeting like this, I'm sure we don't have to consider that for very long. The idea that Scotland has got appalling social problems is quite clear and quite evident to anybody who lives in this city. Anybody who lives in cities across Scotland who's got eyes to see and a mouth to speak about it, because in Scotland we've got heartbreaking poverty amongst plenty. And even in the past couple of weeks since we've been building for this meeting, leafleting in the streets of Dundee and Hilltown and Dryborough and elsewhere, this city has problems like every other that need addressing. We've got terrible inequalities, we've got terrible child poverty in this city and every other. We've got terrible amounts of pensioners petrified of that gas and electric bill that's coming in their door every quarter. Levels of fuel poverty where 1 in 3 families in Scotland are today, in November 2012, in the 21st century, living in fuel poverty. That's unacceptable. It's a disgrace that people should be living with those worries and those concerns and feel unable to get out of their bed, to put a fire on because they're feared of the gas and electric bill that comes in due course. We have terrible social problems with the housing stock in this country. People are living in houses that are quite frankly unfit for human habitation. They need to be improved. And my contention in front of you tonight is, this isn't a poor country. This isn't a country that doesn't have money to give kids a free school meal, to make sure that kids in this city and others have got a pair of shoes that are fit for the winter and they're not traipsing through the snow in Dundee to school in a pair of trainers or less. This isn't a country that can't afford to have pensioners able to put the gas and electric on when they need it to keep warm. This isn't a country that can't afford to have proper, adequate housing with central heating, double glazing and all the basic necessities that Barrack and all the private houses that are getting built today take as standard. This isn't a poor country. This is a wealthy country. And our challenge in the independence movement and the socialists has always been the same. That great wealth has got to be shared out, and it's got to be shared out equally. And it means, quite frankly, comrades, it's got to be taken for those who have it, and to those who need it the most, it's given. Their immediate needs are addressed. And the truth of the matter is, and John McAllion will speak to this better than I ever could, he was at Westminster, and he knows, and you know, and I know, that if we're going to wait for Westminster to come up with that solution, then we'll wait forever, and we'll wait in vain. And that's why this debate on independence is about allowing us to address the issues that are important to us. Independence is about making working people better off, allowing us and our kids and our parents the opportunity to avoid the worst recession in 80 years, the opportunity to put enough food on the table, to put enough gas and electricity, to have enough to live in retirement after having worked for 40 or 50 years in service to this country, in a dignified retirement, not in a humiliation and a degradation that is a day-to-day reality. That's what independence is about. And I would stand in front of you, and I do stand in front of you as a socialist, and say, do you know what? If I thought for a second independence was going to make working people's lives worse, then I wouldn't support it. Because the connection is that I support it because it's an opportunity for our lives to be better and our opportunities to improve. And I watched the other day, I don't know if you've seen this, there's a debate, of course, that goes on the left, and I say, Colin, how can you as a socialist support independence? How can you line up with the nationalists? How can you sit with Nicola Sturgeon on the Yes Scotland Advisory Board? You've been a socialist and she's been a socialist. Have you not heard that Karl Marx proclaimed the wise words that workers of all worlds unite? You have nothing to lose but your chains. Isn't it somehow a contradiction that socialists support independence and the rights of self-determination? And my answer is to look them in the eye and say, no, it isn't. It wasn't a contradiction for John McAllion, it wasn't a contradiction for James Connolly, and it isn't a contradiction just now. Because we look around the world and we say, quite rightly, I'm a working class laddie from Motherwell, a steel town in Lanarkshire, just like yourself, same as anybody else. And I have more in common with those workers in Mumbai, in Johannesburg, in New York City, in Dublin, than I have with the Duke of Buccleuch, or Lord Forsyth, or Sir David Murray, and that's true. Of course it's true. But equally, I know a bit of my history, and socialists never said to the working class people of India, South Africa, America, and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland, oh no, you can't have your independence for the British Empire, because that would undermine the struggle against the British Empire. We've all got to stay together in one country. Of course, that was a nonsense, and it's a nonsense today. The struggle for independence is hand in hand with the struggle for working class emancipation. And the Scottish Socialist Party's attitude is, this offers us the opportunity to bring that vision that we have that bit closer. And I put that contention in front of you. And I wanted to say a couple of things. You know, the other day, I don't know if you've seen this on television, the Chinese Communist Party elected a new leader. Did you see it? And Sandra can relax, this isn't a lead off in China, it's far too complicated for that. But it was said in the BBC, if you ever watched the BBC, one newsreader from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night would say incredulously, they said, and it was clearly part of the script given to all newsreaders, imagine a country where the people in charge aren't elected. That's what they said about China. Imagine a country where the people in charge aren't elected, and I thought, oh, imagine. Then I thought to myself, yeah, who elected the governor of the BBC? I don't remember that vote. Who elected the CEO of HBOS, or BP, or Unilever? In other words, the big corporations who actually own, run and control this country, they didn't get elected either, did they? So when you look at that newsreader's expression of incredulity with the Chinese, I mean, what's all that about? They don't have elections, the people in charge never get elected, you don't know how it worked, don't know how he become the CEO of China. And you go, actually China's not so far from him, is it? I don't know who elected the CEO of Tata Steelworks in Motherwell. I don't know who elected the CEO of McAllion. or Timex when they were here, and of course nobody did. That's why you don't know. And the fact of the matter is, the Scottish Socialist Party, socialists like you and I, we actually believe in democracy, don't we? I'm actually in favour of the BBC's contention that those in charge are elected. Not only elected, but they're accountable, and they're answerable, and after they're elected and they make an arse of it, they're replaceable. That's what democracy means. I'm a great advocate of democracy, I'm a great advocate and I'm a great admirer of Robert Burns, who posed these ideas some 250 years ago. And it reminds me, the Scottish Socialist Party insists tonight again, that it's nonsense. It's nonsense I put in front of you. It's nonsense, the idea that an independent Scotland retains the monarchy and hereditary privilege in this country. Not only is it nonsense, but it's needing to be ridiculed and satirised every day of the week for my money. Because I stand in front of you in favour of a modern democratic republic for Scotland. And I look around the world and I go, do you know what? Actually, it's monarchs who are in short supply when you look around the world. There isn't a Queen of America as far as I know. There isn't a Queen of France. There isn't a Queen of Germany. You know, I mean, you look around the world and these are apparently competitor nations similar to our country. Well, they don't have kings and queens. And one of the things that was discussed at the Radical Independence Conference at the weekend was this idea of a republic. And I made the point, you know, when the monarchists, Tories and Labour, and now the SNP, I'm sorry to say, they say, well, you know, the truth is, Colin, the Queen's got no power. Just a wee woman, she's in her 90s doing that. She brings a lot of people, to be fair, to see her at Buckingham Palace and all that. They have a wedding from time to time, the television ratings, they love it and all that. So what's your beef with that poor wee soul? It's got no powers, you want to lighten up. It's no important. And then, a minute later they go, on the other hand, Sandra, it's fair to say that Her Majesty has brought 50 years of stability to this country since the Second World War. She acts as a leveller. We've not had revolutions or coup d'etats, and I think that's due to the Queen. And you think to yourself, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. She can't have no power and be responsible for stability for 50 years in this country. And of course the truth is, both arguments are bunkum, because the Queen does have enormous power as the head of state. I was in the Scottish Parliament, John McAllion was in the Scottish Parliament. You get elected on the Thursday by the good people of Dundee in his case, and the good people of the Lothians in my case. The bad people didn't vote for me. Anyway, on the Thursday, you get elected. The next Tuesday, you get called to Parliament, you better turn up, 9 o'clock and all that. First thing you got to do, you got to stand there and swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen, her heirs and successors. And they say, and if you don't do it, you don't get to take your seat. You'll be standing out there in the street for the next 4 years. And I'll go, what? The Queen didn't elect me. I'm a Democrat. The people who elected me are sovereign. The voters of this country are sovereign. So all of a sudden you find the Queen decides who can sit in the Parliament, who can't. The British Parliament's the same at Westminster. You know, the Scottish Parliament, you have to swear an oath of allegiance to the Queen or you don't get in. MSPs and MPs. The Queen has all these crown powers. She appoints all the Privy Councillors. You go to any court in the country, if you're up in court, fighting the poll tax, whatever else, the court, big crest of the Queen behind them, isn't there? The judiciary are beholden to the Queen, she's the ultimate legal authority. The army swear an oath of allegiance not to the people, but to the Queen. And before you know it, the powers of the Queen and the monarch are substantial. She appoints the Prime Minister. Remember when they hung Parliament, you see this car, David Cameron, he drives round. He's the majority, him and Nick Clegg have cobbled together a coalition. They go to see ask the Queen for permission to form a government. Scottish Parliament, Westminster Parliament, no bill can be passed unless the Queen signs it off. So before you know, you've got a substantial power in the land. And it's not good enough for socialists ever to say, yeah, but they never use it. You know, she's never pulled down a Parliament. Yeah, she's never needed to. But she has that power and authority. And for me, this is completely unacceptable. You know, in a democracy, you don't have the divine right of kings and queens. You don't have hereditary privilege. Burns and others, Thomas Paine, they were writing about this hundreds of years ago. And it's as true now as it ever was then. And of course for Scotland, the Scottish Socialist Party distances itself completely from a feudal anachronism that has no place in the modern world anywhere in this country or anywhere else. And that, I think, in part gives you an idea what's the difference between the Scottish Socialist Party and others. Well, for me, independence and winning the referendum in 2014, the presentation we make is the independence
message is this is about transformation. This is a transformational message. This isn't about saying we'll have independence and everything stays the same. Because you ask yourself, what is independence for? Is it simply to have a saltire flying over Dundee City Council instead of the Union Jack? Is it to have the same financiers and global corporations who control the Scottish economy, unelected, unaccountable and unanswerable, in charge again when we're independent? Is it to continue saying nothing can be done about the brutal inequalities in this city and others as far as child poverty, fuel poverty, senior citizens in poverty is concerned? Nothing can be done about that either. Is it about saying that an independent Scotland will also stay in NATO and will send laddies for this city to die in Iraq and Afghanistan and God knows where in the future, just as they do the new in dishonourable wars? Is it to say that an independent Scotland will still retain the biggest nuclear arsenal in the whole of Europe, 50 miles outside of Glasgow? My answer is, no, I think not. I think not. Independence is about changing all that. It's about taking the shame of Scotland's international reputation and our domestic record and changing it completely. Starting afresh, starting anew, starting from a beginning that says, the people of this country who need help the most are first in line. And those people who need help the least, they're last in line. Because there was a poll, I don't know if you've seen it a few weeks ago, I think it was run by Maury, and they said to people, if the independence referendum was tomorrow, how would you vote? 37% said they'd vote for independence, 47% said they would be against. And their second question was, aye, but see if you were £500 a year better off under independence, how would you vote then? And 60% said they were for independence. You think about that for a second. £10 a week. £10 a week, that's what 500 quid a year is. For £10 a week, people are saying, I go with independence because it's my living standards are important to me. And Alex Salmond's comment on this was, well, I tell you what, under independence, you'd be at least £1,000 a week, you'd be £1,000 better off a year. And my contention is, under Alex Salmond, I'm afraid, the wealth of Scotland wouldn't be shared out equally. You and me, we get bobbies. The way things are just now, the wealth is shared out, it's no you and I that benefit. It's the millionaires and billionaires, it's the Tom Farmers and Tom Hunters, it's the big industrial conglomerates in this city. They'd get a damn sight more than 1,000 and we get a damn sight less, and on average it would be 1,000. Well, the Scottish Socialist Party's attitude is, they'll get nothing. In fact, the Scottish Socialist Party's view is, you see Scottish and Southern Electric, whose headquarters are based in Perth, just up the road from here, who hold the dismal record of the 6 energy companies responsible for 1 in 3 households in this country being in fuel poverty. They have the sickening distinction of having more customers in fuel poverty than any of the rest. So my contention is, in an independent Scotland, that will be taken back into public ownership from whence it came. The wealth that's generated for your gas and electric bill will ensure nobody in this country lives in fuel poverty, and if there's anything left, it goes to build houses and schools and social provision, rather than being put into the hip pocket of the share owners of yet another multinational corporation. That's the socialist answer. That's what independence offers us the opportunity to, and that's what we mean to achieve by doing it. And I wanted to just say this as a couple of things in finishing my remarks, because essentially we're all addressing the issue that the polls suggest at the moment that if a referendum was taken today, a third would only vote for independence. A third would be against it, and they say that there's a third in the middle that don't knows. And you'd have to say, well, that is a challenge for the yes movement. It's a challenge for those of us in favour of independence to persuade our fellow countrymen and countrywomen, the people who share this country between us, that their best interests are served by independence. And we have to say to the 33% in the middle that you have to be persuaded that this is at your advantage. And there was a poll, I don't know if you've seen this one, that the Sunday Times did, and they suggested to ask people again, would you be for independence or against it? 40% for, 60% against. And the second question this time was, aye, but what if it looked like the Tories were going to win the 2015 general election for Westminster? How would you vote then? And it completely turned around. 60% were in favour of independence. And the polls will tell you a lot of things, but I think what you conclude from that is, this is a referendum that's there to be won. People haven't made up their mind. These aren't static, nothing will change. These polls will change. The opportunity for socialists to put their case and to persuade working people that their interests are best served by a changed Scotland where their interests are served is wide open for us. And I think that's the big message of this meeting. And I want to say in finishing, I'd ask you to do two things. First of all, if you're not involved in the Yes Scotland campaign, then I would urge you to do so. The declaration's at the back, you can sign it. The details of how you get involved in it are at the back. The material there's at the back. And as I sit in the Yes Scotland Advisory Board, I have to say I've got this habit of telling you things that I'm not supposed to. That's because I don't sit in many boards. I'm not a board person, right? I don't understand what secrets you're supposed to keep and you don't, so I don't keep any and I tell them everything. And tomorrow morning, if anybody's tweeting this, I'll get annoyed. I'll get a rocket up my arse for the Yes Scotland office. It's happened at the meeting in Edinburgh that John was speaking at in the Royal Commonwealth Pool. And I happened to say to everybody there was a board meeting on Monday, and keep this to yourself, but there's only going to be one question. Right? And people were like, fair enough, right, fine. And there was one question, but the next morning I'm in Princess Street at Megaphone, my mobile phone goes and it's Blair Jenkins. I don't know if you know this guy, he's the chief executive, he's the headmaster of the Yes Scotland campaign, right? And he says, how did your meeting in Edinburgh go last night? Oh, it was terrific. There was 96 people there. John McAllion was terrific, Sandra was terrific, Campbell Marsh terrific. Aye, he says, aye, hold on. He says, did you tell the meeting there'd only be one question? And I said, no, I don't remember that phrase, I don't remember that formal words, right? He said, well, there was a woman there for the Hollywood magazine called Mandy Rose, and she tweeted it, you said it at the time, right? So I got pelters for that. Anyway, never mind that. Here's another secret, right? The fact is that the Yes Scotland inaugural meetings around the country, I know there's been one in Dundee, they're going to be inaugurated, these Yes Scotland groups, in every one of the 32 council areas in Scotland, right? So there's been 22. And more than 3,000 people have turned up to those meetings collectively. 3,000 meetings, there's still one in Glasgow, we're expecting about 1,000 to turn up, and there's 10 others. So the likelihood is you're talking 3, 4, 5,000 people turning up to those collectively, adding them all together. And one thing's worth bearing in mind, this isn't people coming together to debate whether they're for or against independence. This is 5,000 people turning up to organise the vote for independence. And the closest I can compare that to, I and other people I recognise for here were around in the late 80s when with the anti-poll tax campaign. You remember the anti-poll tax movement where you would organise a meeting in a hill town or Lochee or Dryborough or anywhere else, and before you know it, 50, 100 people would be there in the local community centre, and before you knew it, you had a mass movement, anti-poll tax movement that built into the Anti-Poll Tax Federation. And I have to say, I remember that. I've got grey hair today, 30 years ago, whenever it was 25 years ago. This is the closest I've seen to that. This is the same burgeoning independence movement. 5,000 people turned up so far, and this is just the beginning with 2 years to go to the Yes Scotland campaign. So be part of it. Get involved in it, play what part you can, leaflet your community, a wee stall at the shopping centre, come down to see Desperate Dan the way we've been. Do all of that, get involved in it. Because promise yourself that in 2 years' time, when this referendum is won, that you contributed to the victory. It belongs to you as much as it belongs to anybody else. We're going to be in the winning side, and you want to be in the winning side, don't you? So get involved in the Yes Scotland campaign and play your part. And if you want to get involved in the Scottish Socialist Party, that's fine too. Because the more socialists, progressives, people like us involved in that campaign means that the coloration of the campaign is redder than it was going to be, that the message to working people is that you're going to be better off. Not Sean Connery, not anybody who lives in Marbella, not the big corporations, not Sir George Mathewson or all the others on the Yes Scotland Advisory Board, but the good, working class, honest, true grafters in this city who deserve it the most to be better off. That's the message. Join Yes Scotland, join the Scottish Socialist Party. Thanks very much.
Colin was saying, I've actually done a number of these meetings around Scotland so far, but I've never had to follow anything like Gary Robertson. Colin always said, follow that. I don't know how I'm going to follow that. It's very, very difficult. But I was looking on the internet today and I came across a soundbite, I suppose you would call it, that says the only honest politician is the politician who, when he or she is bought, remains bought. And I'm not as cynical as that. But I would say from my experience of parliamentary politics that honestly is a very rare bird indeed in the parliamentary political sphere. And I think we saw an example of that this week when the BAE Systems announced that they were considering the closure of one of their 3 shipyards at Scotston and Govan in the Clyde and at Portsmouth in the south of England. And immediately they had said that, Westminster's finest in Scotland were all over our print and broadcast media, warning that if Scotland dared to vote yes in 2014, then in the words of Jim Murphy, Labour's shadow defence spokesperson, as he put it exactly, we know for a fact that independence will close Scotland's shipyards. Now, of course, the truth is that we do not know for a fact that independence will close Scotland's shipyards. BAE Systems themselves have said no such thing. Indeed, they say the only issue for them is how to maintain the design capacity and the ability to manufacture complex warships. And in that respect, the likelihood is that Govan and Scotstoun have got real advantages over Portsmouth and will survive into the long term. In any case, as one editorial in a Scottish newspaper said this week, the problems that are associated with one independent country supplying militarily sensitive equipment to another country can easily be overcome through negotiation, through memorandums of understanding, through agreement between the 2 countries concerned and the company. And of course, the company in this sense is BAE Systems, is a British company that already supplies sensitive military equipment to the governments of the United States of America and Australia and India, and controversially, of course, Saudi Arabia as well. Now, Jim Murphy knows all of that much better than I know it, but Jim Murphy decided to keep that knowledge away from the Scottish people, and instead he preferred to try to frighten them into clinging on to Britain. Not because Britain is something worth clinging on to, but for fear of what Scottish independence might mean, for fear of what it might mean to end a political union that's lasted for over 300 years. And that's a fear which we will have to accept is real enough here in Scotland. I think the writer, William McAllion, got it absolutely right in a poem that he penned just after the failure of the first devolution referendum in 1979. The poem was called The Cowardly Lion. And in the poem, McAllion describes how the lion, which represents the Scottish people, discovers the door to its cage is open, and it sticks out its head, and in his words, smelling the terrible distances of freedom, and feeling the risk of not being confined, the lion slunk back into its cage and lives to this day in stinking straw. And I thought that summed it up perfectly. This fear that exists out there in Scotland, that we can't do it on our own. We're too frightened to do it on our own, and we've got to stay where we are. And we have to accept that there are risks involved with independence. But as Colin said earlier when he was speaking, all of those countries that at one time or the other was under the heel of the British Empire found that those were risks worth taking, went for their independence and got their independence. And not one of those countries has asked to come back under British rule since they left. And I believe that not only will future generations of Scotland's not come back under British rule, they'll thank this generation of Scots if we've got the courage to get out there and vote yes in 2014. But much more importantly than that, I personally do not accept that Scotland's capacity to build warships for Westminster governments should either influence or determine the outcome of this referendum campaign. Because remember, the giant aircraft carriers that are currently being built and the next generation of Type 26 frigates that will come on stream in a couple of years' time, these are ships that will become part of NATO's global war-fighting machine. And at some point in the future, NATO will use those ships to rain down indiscriminate death and destruction on innocent populations of a country in Asia or the Middle East or Africa that just happens to fall foul of the American-led coalition. And I passionately believe that the future of Scotland's shipyards should be better and offer a more bright prospect than endlessly turning out weapons of mass destruction for our masters in the south and for our masters in the NATO alliance. Why can't our shipyards, for example, be used to provide the technology for wind and wave and tidal and hydro schemes that will power a future green revolution that might help to save this planet rather than producing weapons of destruction that help to destroy this planet? That's the future. And of course, 3,500 skilled jobs in the Clyde do matter. I'm not saying that they don't matter. They do matter, and we have to answer questions like that if we're going to convince people to vote yes. But other jobs matter as well. Here in Dundee, we've lost 1,000 council jobs in the last year alone. And that same process of job destruction, which is going on either through early retirement or voluntary retirement, is taking away thousands of jobs across Scotland in every single council area. The Chief Constable of the new Police Force of Scotland was complaining yesterday that he might not have control of the support staff in the police forces. That's because he's already made it clear that as Scotland's 8 police forces are integrated into one, 3,000 of those staff jobs are actually going to be cut under his control. Tens of thousands of civil service jobs have already gone, and just as many will go again in the next few years. The Scottish Government over the past 2 years has got rid of 2,000 civil service jobs here in Scotland. BBC jobs in Scotland are going. Ministry of Defence jobs in Scotland are going. Jobs in the private sector like Halls or Broxburn are going. But the politicians like Jim Murphy never say anything about those jobs. Partly because they can't blame it on an independent Scotland that can't exist, that doesn't yet exist. But mostly because they know the real blame for these job losses lies with the government in Westminster and its austerity programme and the savage cuts it's making to public spending. So I think we should try to conduct this debate, certainly with passion, but the passion that we bring to the debate has to be tempered with honesty. We have to tell people what really is the case, what really is happening. And we also have to have our passion tempered by being willing to listen to other arguments and to take those arguments on board if they make sense. So I want to begin by trying to assess where we are, and Colin mentioned it earlier on as well. I believe there's a hard core of people both in the Yes campaign and the No campaign who know how they're going to vote in 2014 and who will not change their minds between now and then. Now, if those two hardcore supporters spend the next 2 years shouting at each other, it's going to be an absolute waste of time and futility for everybody concerned, because nobody is going to change their minds. The real target group for our campaign is the middle group that Colin referred to, who are open to but not yet persuaded by the arguments for independence. And we've got to find some way of appealing to that particular group. Now, this group is unlikely to define themselves as nationalists or unionists or even socialists. They're likely to be a very ethnically and culturally diverse group. At the last census, 3% of Scotland's population came from ethnic minority backgrounds. 8% of our population were actually born and brought up in England. Many of the white majority population here in Scotland are actually second, third and fourth generation Irish or Polish or some other nationality. Then there's the baby boomer generation like my own, which are just now entering retirement and who are likely to be the group most likely to vote in the referendum. And they will vote in that referendum with memories of a British state that just after the Second World War, that a free national health service, free education all the way to university, and a welfare state that covered them from cradle to grave. And then there's other groups, like the European Union migrant workers who will be here, who settled here in 2014 and have the right to vote. And if you look at that group in the middle that comes from all these different backgrounds, any argument to make them vote yes, which is based on a narrow definition of Scottish nationalism, Braveheart or Whas like us, or the best wee country in the world, is going to fail, because they're not going to listen to that kind of argument. We're going to have to convince this ethnically and culturally diverse group that there are reasons for them to vote yes, that their lives will be changed by independence, and that the very problematic country that they live in at the moment can be turned into a much better country by independence. That's why the SNP strategy mystifies me. They're actually trying to run this campaign and painting a picture of Scotland, of independent Scotland, which is not very different from the Scotland that remains within Britain at the moment. And that to me makes no sense whatsoever. Colin's done it much better than I could. But why should we vote to keep the Queen and her family reigning over us when a no vote gets you exactly that in any case? Why should we vote to stay in NATO when we already are in NATO through Scotland and Britain? Why should we vote to keep the same anti-trade union laws as already exist here in Britain? Why vote to keep the same privatised rail and bus franchises? Why vote to keep the same big 6 energy companies ripping us off and putting our elderly population at risk every winter? Why vote yes for a neoliberal Scotland when we already have a neoliberal Britain? And if nothing much is going to change with independence, why bother with independence at all? That's why I think the SNP strategy is entirely wrong, and why I think that we have to make this appeal to that middle group by being, our appeal to them must be rooted in the hope and the aspiration and the expectation that real political, economic and social change will follow upon independence. And as Colin says, taking down Union Jacks from our civic buildings will matter not at all if Scotland outside of Britain is no different from Scotland inside of Britain. And that's, I've been speaking about neoliberal politics, and of course the neoliberal model for economic development is not only the British model, it's the European model, it's the global model. And of course that model says that if you cut taxes, if you deregulate your economy, if you privatise all your public organisations and so on, that will attract foreign inward investment into your country and will generate economic growth that will enable the country to go forward. And of course any threat to that neoliberal model for economic development, whatever happens across the world, whether it's socialist Cuba and Venezuela, will mean that the countries who break with the model will be treated like pariahs and will be isolated from all the other countries. Even last week, before Catalonia voted by a majority for nationalist parties, the Guardian newspaper was carrying coverage of the Catalonian elections, in which the headlines warned that multinational companies would disinvest, that foreign investors would be frightened off, and that the Catalonian economy would go down the plug hole if Catalonia dared to vote for nationalist parties and dared to hold a referendum. And we'll see what happens in Catalonia as the years come in, but exactly the same threats will be used against Scotland becoming independent. And they will be used by all of the unionist parties. And tragically, they'll be used by many in the Scottish National Party as well, who do not think that there is any alternative to the neoliberal economic order. And that is why they're going around saying nothing much is going to change in an independent Scotland. It's just that we'll be Scottish neoliberals rather than British neoliberals. But of course there is an alternative to that model. And the alternative is a country which is not unlike Scotland at all, and of course I'm talking about Norway. Norway, like Scotland, has got the same population as we have, and like us, is rich in energy resources. But unlike Scotland, Norway has been independent for more than 100 years. And unlike Scotland, Norway has twice voted in referendum to stay out of the European Union. And unlike Scotland, Norway has its own currency. And unlike Scotland, Norway has strategic control of its own oil and gas resources, so a government stake in the big Statoil energy company. You know, oil was discovered off the shores of Norway about the same time as it was discovered off the shores of Scotland. But what Norway did was in 1996 to set up an oil fund, sometimes called a sovereign wealth fund, into which all the oil and gas revenues were paid. And the Norwegian government was only allowed to take 4% of the returns of that fund every year, which is equivalent to about 11% of all government spending in Norway. And that fund is owned by the people of Norway, and its current value is £400 billion, and it's expected to double in value over the next decade. Meanwhile, the oil that was discovered off Scotland's shores has been frittered away by successive British governments that used it to cut taxes and to reduce government bonding. And so Scotland finds itself many, many miles behind independent Norway. Now, Norway has used its independence and its wealth fund to invest in infrastructure, to make it one of the best run countries in the world, to create a social security system which is universal in its application, where there is no means testing, and where every citizen gets access to coverage from cradle to grave. And at the same time, Norway has used high taxes to actually transfer wealth from the rich to the poor, and as a result, Norway is now rated the most equal country in the world. And Norway is top of the United Nations Human Development Index. It has life expectancy levels, literary rates, and standards of living that are at the envy of the rest of the world. Now, I'm not suggesting that if we vote yes in 2014 that overnight Scotland will become Norway. Of course it won't. But what I'm suggesting is that Norway does show what can be done with independence. And it gives the lie to those who go around saying that Scotland's too small, too insignificant to ever be able to cut the mustard in a big global economy that's dominated by big power states. Now, I know that what I'm saying, and what anyone else is saying, at the tail end of 2012 will be long forgotten by the autumn of 2014. In my case, maybe by the time you go out the door here tonight. But I still think we should use the next 23 months to try to widen the debate on Scottish independence away beyond the limits that are set for us by this neoliberal straitjacket. Let's for example debate what joining the euro would actually mean for the lives of ordinary working people in this country. Let's speak about what limitations would follow if we stayed within the pound in a sterling currency area. I know that an independent Scotland would not get a vote in the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, but neither do any British politicians, because New Labour made the Bank of England independent in any case. Let's talk about these things, and let's also talk about whether we should go in the long term for our own currency, whether we should break off in a different direction from the ones that they say are available to us at the moment. And let's see if we couldn't have a relationship to the European Union that's the same as Norway's. Let's debate these things, and above all, let us begin to discuss how we can smash the neoliberal consensus that's dominated our politics for the past 40 years. You know, it's very well known that as taxes are cut, and as your economy is deregulated, and as your public sector is spending on it is slashed, that inequality in your country will grow. And in fact, Britain is now more unequal in terms of income and wealth and health and education and life opportunities than at any time since the 1920s. That's well known by social and economic researchers. We also know that as inequality is reduced, so too are all the problems that are associated with inequality. Ill health, early mortality, crime, debt, mental illness, obesity, drug abuse, alcoholism. As a country becomes more equal, these problems all become much less and are significantly reduced by that more equal country. That's why I believe that part of this campaign should be an argument for higher taxes and for public spending as a means of redistributing wealth between the rich and the poor, because that won't break the economy of the country. It will actually make the economy of the country run better in a more equal society. And I also believe that we should begin, as Colin says, to talk about public ownership again. If Germany and Holland and France and Spain have got publicly owned railways, why can't we have publicly owned railways as well? It's happening everywhere in the world except here. And there's example after example which we go on to. But I'll finish on this point. I read recently that this debate that's now taking place is not actually diverting people from the real issues that we should all be talking about. But it is in fact, which one paper described it as the biggest political fight in this country since the Irish Wars of Independence. Now, the Irish Wars of Independence were fought at the end of 1916 to 1921 or something, I think it was, at a time when the British Empire was all-powerful, frighteningly powerful, and Britain is now in a much weaker state than it was then. The Irish won their independence, and I believe that we can win our independence as well. But we won't be able to do that if we leave this debate to the elites in the parliaments at Holyrood and Westminster. We won't be able to do that if we let Alex Salmond and Joanne Lamont dominate this debate. We won't be allowed to do that if we let the press and the media dominate this debate, to have the debate confined within the political elites that operate all across this island. We need to make this debate our debate. We make this debate this people's debate. And the people have got to contribute to that debate. And if we do that, then I do believe that slowly but surely that middle group, the million or so that Colin described, will begin to listen, because they want to hear the arguments for independence. They want to be convinced that independence can work, because they know that Britain isn't working, and it's up to us to show them how Scotland would work. Thanks very much.